jusqu'à l'infini. Ce soir, je te suis 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 jusqu'à l'infini. Ce soir, je te suis.
Welcome to Seminar 15 of Greats in Thought. This week, we take a break from books and consider another Hollywood masterpiece. One flew over the cuckoo's nest, but not in the way you might expect. Excavating the foundations of this great work, we found a script, the original, official script that is entirely different to the one realized in the film, and a million miles away from the book on which both script and film are based. Don't listen to the bullhorns. Ignore the searchlights. Scatter like the cockroach, preparing for nuclear winter. Do not expect to find here the film you thought you knew. Put on your goggles. Activate your oxygen tanks. Say goodbye to your loved ones. This would be a good time to take a shit, to masturbate, to throw up, take a piss, and exude yourself of all other unfulfilled bodily fluids. We do not fly over the cuckoo's nest. We get out our spades and dig in search for autonomy, in search for capacity, ending in confinement. Don't worry. We have tools handy. Should you find yourself in a tight spot to wrench you out. Greats in Thought. Read, riff, rapscalionate in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Greats in Thought.
All right. Throwing the boys into the deep end a bit. Me and Jakob are sharing the mic, so hopefully the sound's okay.
Hello. Yeah.
When we were looking into One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, we were searching for the script just to see, how it was written, how it was realized, the difference between the two, and the difference between the official script, for which the two people who wrote this script won best screenplay at the Oscars.
I still think it's a draft.
I mean, it doesn't. As a writer, it doesn't read like a draft to me. It reads like someone different has written it. Like it reads so different that it's like a completely different set of writers. It doesn't read like a preface where I've written something and then I've had some input and then I've written something else. It's like it's completely different. So to dig into that script, have you got the document up, Patrick?
Yeah.
So this is how the script, the official script of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, begins. And as you will see, it's in a form altogether different. First scene, external, work farm, nightfall. All we see is an elevated shot of the distant mountains, rolling landscape, and McMurphy, one cheek laid open and crusted over with dried blood, his face and prison work clothes caked with dried sweat and dust, as he sits on the very top of a water tower, watching the last rays of sunlight. A long moment passes before McMurphy's attention is drawn elsewhere, and he looks down.
Reverse shot. McMurphy's point of view. Far below, in the prison yard, a man is seen hurrying across the yard, where he joins a group of men composed of armed prison guards, officials and medics. A stretcher, an ambulance, a fire truck and safety nets spread out at the base of the water tower. The man is seen talking to the officials. Then a bullhorn is handed to him, and they all look up at McMurphy. McMurphy, as he looks down at them, a searchlight is turned on him.
Man, voiceover, through bullhorn. McMurphy, this is Dr. Shanko from the infirmary. Can you hear me?
McMurphy doesn't respond.
Shanko, voiceover, through bullhorn. Can you hear me, McMurphy?
McMurphy doesn't respond. Another searchlight goes on as a second voice is picked up on the bullhorn. Second voice, through bullhorn. Why don't we blast him? For Christ's sake, he ain't gonna come down, you! The bullhorn is turned off. A long moment passes as McMurphy continues to squat on the tower and wait. He shivers against the coming night when...
Shanko, voiceover, through bullhorn. McMurphy, I have the warden's promise. If you come down, nobody will hurt you. You'll be in my custody, I promise.
An imperceptible smile appears on McMurphy's face. Second interior, men's dormitory, Oregon State Hospital, dawn. Strange humming sounds, clanking pipes, and hissing radiators, as we see beds with patients lying asleep line two walls. The third wall is a heavy gauge steel grille with a door that opens onto the day room. The door is open. On the far side of the day room, a long hallway with other doors opening into rooms. The latrine, washroom, tub room, mess hall, seclusion room, psychiatrist's office, visitor's room, etc. Across the day room, a glass enclosed nurse's station where Turkle, a Negro night attendant, is seen preparing to go off duty. The camera pans the beds in the men's dorm. One man turns, another twists, a third lies as if dead.
Camera pan ends on Bromden, who lies still, eyes wide open, very alert. He reaches down, plucks a stale piece of gum from under the bed frame, puts it in his mouth and starts chewing. A beat. Then Bromden carefully undoes the leather strap which binds him to the bed. He slips out of the bed and quietly makes his way down the aisle, paying no attention to the other patients, some of whom are beginning to stir awake. Ahead, at the end of the hallway, the door opens, and 3 Negro day attendants, Washington, Warren, and Miller, dressed in white uniforms, enter and move down the hallway and disappear into a side room.
Bromden continues his silent journey towards the day room as Turkle emerges from the side door to the nurse's lounge, goes up the hallway as Miss Pilbow, the day nurse, comes in, passing Turkle on the way out. She crosses to the nurse's station and enters as Bromden reaches the day room. As Bromden makes his way across the day room, past the nurse's station, unnoticed by Miss Pilbow, who is busy preparing the day's medication.
Bromden is sliding along the hallway wall when he is suddenly cut off by a mop which thuds against one side of his neck. A second mop yokes him on the other side. Bromden freezes, terrified.
Interior, day room, day 8. No sound as we see big nurse watch the last few patients file past the side door to the nurse's station, where Miss Pilbow hands out little cups with pills. Washington stands by, checking to see each man takes his pills before filling their cups with orange juice. The last patient takes his pills and returns to his place in the day room. Miss Pilbow closes the window, satisfied that all is well.
Big Nurse turns on an old 45 record player with a stack of records. Then she settles down to her work as a soft, nostalgic number from the 40s is heard over loudspeaker. Camera begins slow pan of the day room. The patients, under the influence of drugs, have settled down for the day. Harding is playing cards with Martini. Cheswick and Billy Seefeld, and Friedrichsen are putting a jigsaw puzzle together in brotherly love. Sorensen is off by himself, rubbing his hands clean. Tabor, pencil in hand, sits pondering over a blank piece of paper. Scanlon paces back and forth. On the chronics side of the room, Ruckley is turning a grimy photograph over in his hands. Bancini sits wagging his head, mumbling over and over, tired, awful tired. Ellis stands against the wall, arms outstretched, hands nailed to the wall by imaginary nails. Bromden is pushing a mop around.
Telephone rings. Cut to 9, interior, nurse's station, day 9. As Miss Pilbow picks up the phone. Miss Pilbow, 82, Miss Pilbow speaking, yes. She makes a note and hangs it. New admission, Miss Ratched. Miss Pilbow goes to the mirror, quickly preens herself, then turns and flips the intercom on. Miss Pilbow, over the loudspeaker. Mr. Washington, Mr. Warren.
A long beat. Then McMurphy slowly emerges from the car. He's wearing handcuffs and dressed in faded jeans, flannel work shirt, leather jacket, black motorcycle cap, and heavy black boots. He's been scrubbed clean and has a band-aid on his cheek. McMurphy does a couple of knee bends to get the kinks out of his legs as Deputy reaches in the car and takes out a small gym bag containing McMurphy's belongings.
Boom.
So I thought...
So what's that, a found first scene? Like, you looked at this draft or whatever original version of the script, and you found this as the opening scene?
Yeah.
All right.
This is the opening scene. Whereas in the film, it starts with the music being put on and medication time.
Yeah. And then McMurphy has just seemed to come in the police car.
Mm.
Yeah. And the opening is when he like in that little vestibule and he's looking up and there's a kind of like spiral staircase and people are kind of, teetering over the edge of the banisters. And there's that moment, like that ceremonious moment where his handcuffs are taken off, and a little sort of smirk appears on his face. And then he just begins to kind of like whoop and cackle and do a kind of little foxtrot and a twirl. Yeah, it's an amazingly rich moment.
It's interesting. I mean, what really happens, I feel, in this version of the screenplay that we've read or that we read from, is this thing that, or maybe Luke, you can expand on this, but is this thing that, I mean, there's so much set up in this screenplay, right? Where in the film we just meet him in kind of civilian clothes or in his own clothes, and there is this suspense of course, why, is this guy a patient? Is he not? Like, why? I mean, surely he must be some kind of patient because he was handcuffed and put in there. But there is this. Well, now I haven't read the full script, but there is this suspense in the film, like who is he? Why is he here? That isn't in the script, I feel, or like in the original screenplay, or this version at least.
Yeah, like in a way, just it kind of goes with lots of the stuff that we've said about psychiatric power, that it kind of erases your actual past and gives you a sort of substitute past, reduces, or if you like, completely converts your past into a currency that's actually recognized by the institution, a past of like that takes the form of diagnosis, a profile, a set of symptoms, a backstory, a date of birth, a place of birth, and so on. Now, so what I kind of like about the film is, I'd say that here they kind of sketch the reason, his like attempt to seem mad, okay? But what I like about the film is there's almost like, on the one hand, it's like the Heideggerian thrownness idea. Yeah, he's just, what would happen if we got an exuberant, kind of charismatic, but slightly reckless man and just threw him into the asylum, And it's that, like, as if the world had just commenced that day. His whole past had been kind of like in some way erased or symbolically erased because it's now irrelevant. Yeah. And then there's something like he finds himself in this asylum, and part of him, in the film itself, it's not like he's trying to stay there. Part of him, there are many things that are happening at once. One is that he's trying to stay there because he doesn't want to go back to prison. So he's trying to prove that he's mad, but that kind of peters away a little bit. The other thing is that he's trying to get out because there's all this talk about escaping. Yeah. But the thing that brings those two things together is that he's trying to like guide the others out. It's a bit like a version of Plato's allegory of the cave. You go out into the light and you see the light, but then the philosopher has to come back down into the cave again and liberate the other prisoners. So there's some sense in which he's trying to prove to the other mad people that they're not actually mad. Yeah. Or that he's trying to, and then when he starts to panic, he starts to try and convince himself that they're not mad. There comes this kind of transition moment. He tries to persuade them they're not mad because he doesn't understand them at the beginning. There's this moment where he wants them to vote to put on the World Series, and he can't understand why he's only got 3 votes. So he's like, shit, well, fucking hell, I've got some more work to do here, in order to be able to prove that there's kind of no such thing as madness. He's not doing that deliberately. I don't want to make it sound too formulaic, but there's something like that going on at this unconscious level.
I think it's to me it's this question of kind of like interruption versus insertion. So in the screenplay, as it goes on, it kind of, there are all of these depictions of him, being like shown his bed and told like, the order, the rules, the routine, so the screenplay is very much, I think, maybe the dramatic emphasis that the screenplay tries to take, which the film rejects, is that he's inserted into this thing, and then in some way, he plays this kind of like Pied. I'd say he's almost more like a Pied Piper,
Yeah,
kind of like singing and dancing the mad like out of the asylum. Whereas in the film, he's much more of, like immediately he's an interruption. Immediately he's a problem. And there are two moments at the beginning with the glass. So there's the first moment, which is kind of one of the first moments that he really appears in the film, and he's like, could you just turn the music down, so us fellas don't have to shout.
Mm.
And Nurse Ratchet's like, well, Mr. McMurphy, some of the patients in this ward are very old, and if we turn the music down, they wouldn't be able to hear, and that's all that they have.
Mm.
And then this comes to the later on this boiling point where it's about the cigarettes, and it's the guy who's like, no, I want my cigarettes, I want mine. And then kind of Nurse Ratchet again.
Cheswick, right?
Yeah. And then Ratchet again. She kind of explained. She's like, well, Mr. McMurphy has turned the tub room into a saloon, and he's won all of your money and all of your cigarettes, and now they have to be rationed. And then he just goes to to. I don't know. It's a kind of it's an interesting like divergent or contradictory moment, because he actually kind of brings order in and through, like just smashing the glass and grabbing the cigarettes and giving the guy a cigarette. And then you have what's it called, the table, the really slapstick guy,
Who is that?
The guy who gets the cigarette stuck in his
Tabor, right?
Tabor. Yeah, Tabor.
This is so interesting, by the way. Tabor in Danish means loser.
Lucid.
Loser.
Loser.
I mean, it's something that you would...
loser.
Loser, yeah. It's someone who has lost something, right? Like like
Tabor.
You've lost it also, like mentally, right?
Okay.
I was thinking this thing you said, Patrick, about or what we're kind of talking about, this thing of how McMurphy is introduced. I'm thinking about like how we just had an earlier discussion with some people we're working on a film with, and this idea of like withholding kind of information from the protagonist, or like about the protagonist, in a sense that we it seems to me that this could have been something they have considered to like. Because, for example, we can go on actually, and then to this doctor scene where it's Spivey, I think, and then McMurphy, where there's also a lot of information given there about McMurphy, which I think in the film they have chosen to strip out, or like leave that out, kind of, which again is interesting. Apropos this like interruption. This throne nest that you were kind of talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
How it also, no, go on.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, because it reminds me of like your own work, and also at the same time, like Foucault's like, how should I put it? Spider work in the archives. The art of like collage. The art of kind of like arrangement. Okay, so what happens in that scene with Spivey, and Spivey is quite interesting as well, because he calls himself something like Spivey, and then McMurphy calls him Spivey. Okay, now a spiv is someone who sells knockoff goods in the street for a cut price. Like he sells dodgy goods in the street, and the spiv is often dressed up in such a way as to express elegance and respectability. He's usually kind of like suavely dressed, even if he's working from like the back of a lorry or the back of a van or something. It's quite old terminology, but it still survives in some areas in East London. Right?
Yeah, it's like the start of a Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
where they're selling moody watches from out of a briefcase.
Yeah, except for this guy would come alone and he'd be dressed up almost like a kind of street performer, But his uniform would be smart clothes, so he gives the air of being distinguished, even though he's a bit of like a rogue and a charlatan, And in fact, they played a kind of like, I don't want to get too into this, but an economic role in World War II and stuff. That's where they came into existence. The sort of gangsters that would sell stuff on the black market during World War II would often be fronted by these guys called spivs. Okay. Now I think the reason why I think that's relevant is because of the two different pronunciations of that surname. So they're bringing attention to this etymology of the word, this history in the word, by getting McMurphy to say his surname as if it were the same pronunciation as the word spiv. So anyway, so that's one thing. So what's his why is he selling knockoff goods? Why is he given a respectable appearance to knockoff goods? Secondly, there's this idea of, you said that in the screenplay there's lots of information given about, and this is why I want to get to the stuff about your work. There's lots of information given about McMurphy, yeah? But in the film, what they do is they confine the information given about him to the idiom of psychiatry. So only psychiatry is allowed to speak of McMurphy. Only psychiatry is allowed to say who McMurphy is. So you get this moment where he says, where the Dr. Spivey, or whatever his name is, yeah, he says, would you like to tell me like how you came to be here? And McMurphy leans over, looks at the sheet and says, I don't know. What does it say in there? And then Dr. Spivey starts to read out from the sheet. It says here that you're belligerent, that you talk without authorization, that you are, I've got some of it written down here. You're resentful towards work in general, and that you're lazy. And then McMurphy says, and what? That I was chewing gum in class, So I mean, that is so McMurphy is revealed not by some description of him, but by his reaction to the psychiatry's description of him, his ability to play with that description of him, to ironize it and to parody it, and to make it look like a kind of like a school report for naughty behavior, So that's the way in which this, because he's got a sophisticated mind, but Murphy, he's got an incredible lyrical talent. He's extraordinarily eloquent. He comes up with just the right phrases time after time, and that's an important part of his character, that he's able to give a verbal form to his exuberance, to this kind of like high pitch energy that's constantly kind of throttling him. Anyway, just to finish this off, the descriptions are so fucking interesting as well, because what is the difference between being belligerent and talking when unauthorized? What's the difference between being work shy, resentful of work, and being lazy? Well, nothing. But this is precisely the way that the institutions work. They kind of like use language, to thicken out a kind of like abusive description of someone, or to thicken out a sort of in a description of someone that I don't know, cast them as the bad guy. They do it in schools all the time. There'll be like a behavior report, and the behavior report will have 3 bullet points, but they'll all be the same thing. But there will be 3 of them, and you have to give them separate marks for each of them. They'll be like talking in class, answering back, and distracting his friends. They're all the same. They're just like, it's kind of circumlocution there. A little bit of like a verbal sleight of hand, just to make it look like there's a kind of amassed evidence against this person. They've committed 3 faults instead of 1. Anyway, so I just think the fundamental point I want to make is about this idea of collage. You present you arrange the voices of others instead of, being this omniscient narrator, this kind of all-knowing and magisterial narrator, and giving the kind of ultimate truth about someone, giving the kind of like the be-all and the end-all truth about them. But nonetheless, they do reveal themselves in their reactions to the descriptions that the bureaucracy gives, to their ability to play with that code. And I think that's like an incredible, like, rich minimalism there in the beginning of that film, and that's part of it. That conversation, like, another bit is like, I see you've been arrested, 5 times for assault. And Murphy just pauses and he says, what, 5 fights? Rocky Marciano has had 40 of them, and he's a millionaire. And what's really, really fucking interesting about that is, again, you've got this collage thing, this thing of like, because he laughs, we laugh, and then Spivvy's eyes are like, delusion. There's a little thing that goes on in his head. Like, he's like, oh, that's interesting, actually. Maybe they've got a point. Maybe there is something mad about him, comparing himself to Rocky Marciano. Right? So it's like, there is a perspectivism there, and we're not given this like, whatever it is. Like, I think I'm making it more banal now, but this God's eye point of view, to be able to adjudicate between the perspectives. All we're given is the ability to play with these perspectives, to see that one belongs to Dr. Spivey and the other one to, McMurphy. And us too, in our laughter.
What about we read this scene? Because now we've talked or depends on where.
Yeah, unless you had something to say, Luke, particularly about that first scene. What was your interest in it? I'm interested.
Well, I just found it interesting in its absence, and I thought that it spoke to the way in which the Foucault's description of the original psychiatric institution in the original asylum in Salpêtrière or wherever. He goes into great detail about these rituals of insertion, of how they kind of enter into the space, and also there's always this turning over of the case of the reason why, of the why. Whereas here, McMurphy is very much presented as a kind of mystery figure. He seems like the oddball amongst oddballs. He certainly is like a character who acts out of place, but then he clearly does not belong, within this group. And there's a lot to be said about that. But I just thought it was interesting that in its absence, what happens is that he represents, rather than a kind of orderly insertion, as an interruption, but that very interruption is what in the end conquers him and captures him. And that's when the chief begins to speak about his past, which is this quite fascinating like reintroduction of the history of the kind of dossier. And he talks about his father, and he uses this term. He's like, they just worked on him. They just worked on him.
Yeah, what was this? Because I
didn't
catch that one.
He's like, I think it's left unclear as to what happened, but I think in some way his father had some kind of position or role in a town, or and he wasn't welcome for some reason. I mean, perhaps it's like a light touch reference to the kind of colonial conquest of America, vis-a-vis the fact that he's indigenous. And it's the way that they talk about his father. They worked on him, just like they're working on you. And he kind of makes this point to McMurphy that they're working on you, and they're winning. That the power is beginning to kind of work through you. Like, so you're the very I don't know, like mischievous parodic responses that you talked about before were actually already, as you said, being kind of like integrated into the discourse of the psychiatrist, into the to the extent in the end of lobotomy. And then it without that bit with Chief, with the they just worked on him, like they're working on you. This kind of implication that you think you're winning this game, but you're not. You're not. And then they have this kind of dream of escape, but then otherwise, the moment where they're like sat lay down beside the open window, it just becomes kind of like ridiculous. It becomes silly, like those moments in a horror film where you're like, oh, come on, mate, don't touch that. Don't touch it. Just fucking kill it. Smash its head in. If you see if it's alive, it's going to get up and it's going to fucking eat you. Kill the fucking thing. Get it over with. And then, of course, they're like prod and probe, and it's like, and it gets them. But you're like, fuck's sake, It's kind of, I think that, and that's a moment where horror films. I don't know the people who get like taken in by these films, because it's obviously a trope that is commercially successful. But I always watch them, and I'm just like, I mean, there was one in I think it was Prometheus, and they're like on some alien planet, and some snake-like thing comes up, you know.
Yeah.
And it's this snake-like thing, and the guy's like, and you're just like, dude, like you're on a fucking alien planet, like you have no idea what's going on here. This thing's like rearing up, you know, like you'd be backing away, you know, like if it was me, I'd have all my weapons, I'd be backing away, I'd be like, man, this thing might be fucking dangerous, you know. And instead, the guy's like, ooh. And then, of course, it becomes some fucking monster that, like, you know, gobbles him up.
Yeah, I mean that's some perspective on human nature or stupidity, if one will, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like this. If there was a button that said, you know, the universe will end if you press this button, someone would definitely be pushing that button. But however, you know, I don't feel like you know, when I'm watching that scene, that moment where they're lay, like, you know, drunk down beneath I think it is this kind of Pied Piper thing, you know, where he's led this carnival, which is not one of madness, which is actually one of kind of, you know, an ironic and inverted kind of sanity, you know, and joy and fun, and you know, it's almost like a frat house scene. And then, you know, when he lies down, it's almost as if his job is done, you know, his work there is finished. But at the same time, that completion, I don't know, it's this theme that I've been playing around with, this notion of, you know, finality equaling extinction. Like, you know, when Baudrillard talks about the collector, you know, the series or the collection, it loses all fascination once it's completed. Because whilst you are collecting things, well, you know, each new edition adds a new form of differentiation between all the other objects in the collection. But then as soon as you complete the collection, well, the collection then becomes dull. And it's kind of like, you know, in life, like you see it as a, you know, these businessmen. I mean, you know, like Rupert Murdoch, you know, like if he could, you know, jam some juice in his veins and keep working until he was like, you know, 250, like, oh, God, Rupert Murdoch, you know, like the man would just keep going, because the moment at which he you know, he is complete, he's achieved, well, it's over, it's done, it's finished. And I think, you know, rather than it being this horror scene moment where you're like, fucking hell, you know, what you doing sleeping, you know, the fucking window's open, get out, run. It's more that he's brought to fulmination what at a certain moment he began to want to bring. And you know, he says it like quite clearly when, you know, they're talking about someone being insane, and he's like, you guys think you're insane? You're not insane. You're not as insane as the guy walking on the street. You know, he has this thing where he's like, you know, you guys just, you know, you aren't insane. You know, you shouldn't be in here. And that's why the moment when he finds out that most of them are voluntary, like, comes to him as such a shock.
Yeah.
You know.
Wait, just to say something about that scene before we leave something else. I feel that there's a different way of reading it. Maybe instead of finality or completion, or you know, that there is. I mean, there's a sense in which, like, this thing of, yeah, but you're not mad, and how he, I mean, he enjoys himself. It becomes home somehow, right? And I think this is a sort of aspect also of the psychiatric ward, right? That, you know, you become mates, you know, it can form itself as a home, and then there are so many. There are a few passages actually in Psychiatric Power, which is, I can't remember which lecture it is now, but it's this dream of the outside, right? But then this dream of the outside kind of is impossible somehow. I can't remember where it's from. I don't know. Maybe one of you remembers. But no, but I think there's also this reading of, yes, it is. There's definitely this way of reading it as a completion or finalization, but I can also read it like, oh, but you know, so unconsciously he falls asleep because he's at home. You know, he's not vigilant. He's not desperate to get out. Like, why the fuck does he even allow himself to close his eyes? Like, he could just literally get out. Like he could have, fuck it. There is something like, of course, and I think that scene is also amazing. Like how you, as a viewer, is kind of sat. It's like 30 seconds. You just sat there, kind of watching him, and he's like, you hear the sound of the birds, and some truck passes by, and he sat there like. You're like, are you gonna close your eyes and fall asleep? No, fucking hell. I thought that scene was very beautiful. Like, there's just this thing of like, oh, okay. It also comes at this moment in the film, I think, where all of a sudden they can kind of, or not all of a sudden, but when we've come, I think this is what minute, I don't know, maybe we're minute 70, 80, 90 here, where they can also stretch the scenes in a different way. Like now the audience is kind of susceptible to it, and they can stretch them, and we can just sit and look at him for like, a long time, closing his eyes. I think, I don't know. I thought that was, it was a beautiful scene.
Yeah. That is interesting. I don't know where to go from that. But maybe the only thing I want to say is that he does bring something in to the asylum with him. And then there are these like I've just lost. Where are you? Okay, there you go. There are these obviously the relationship between him, just to lay the groundwork, between him and Nurse Ratched is definitely one of duel and joust, yeah. But there's one surface level. I think he doesn't actually realise the game that's being played. Okay, he thinks of he thinks that he's going to wind Nurse Ratched up, a bit like a schoolboy winding up a teacher, or like some kid on the streets winding up a neighbour or something like that. And even the way that he describes it, he's gonna like she won't know whether she's shitting or fixing her wristwatch or something, whatever it is that he says about her. He's gonna put something up her ass. He says that she'll be like one of those cartoons, when they accidentally like get the fire gets lit and they go running around looking for a bucket of water to dip their scorched bottom into or something. So he has a very kind of childish idea of what's going to happen. What we know is that Nurse Ratched has already been watching it. She's already begun another game, a slower game. And so the question is, what has she seen? Like, this is part of, again, the discretion and the minimalism of the film. What has she seen? Well, she's seen the one scene where he's outside trying to teach the chief to slam dunk the basketball. Yeah. And he's running about like a kind of like bird learning how to fly, getting on whatever his name is, not Mancini, what's his name? Mancini's, shoulders. And it's a kind of amazingly funny scene as well. Mancini just walking around saying, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. While this little kid, and think about it, again, he's a little kid. He's on the shoulders of someone, It's like a parody of parenthood. I'm so fucking tired. But it's the only way to get him home is to put on my fucking shoulders. So this weird parody of parenthood. And at the same time, you've got the chief, and you feel that he's waking up to something. The chief is starting to pay attention now. And everything has been set up. You see the institution is kind of against him. You've got that like I don't know what to call them. They're the kind of the guys that look like clean the hallways and kind of what they call the assistants. What's the name for them in a psychiatric hospital? The sort of mental staff. Like anyway, you've got him who questions him about chief.
Attendants.
Yeah, okay, the attendants. Yeah, he can't hear you. So why are you talking? Oh, I'm not doing him any harm. You're not doing him any good. Well, I'm not doing him any harm. So there's this aporia there. But Nurse Ratched is watching everything. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about Luke's stuff about the body without a handle. She's seeing the handle, She's thinking, okay, so this is something I can get hold of then. This is his I'm near to seeing his madness, I'm near to seeing that thing in him, this kind of elated, high-pitched, high spirits. And that's the thing I can grab hold of and to steer my diagnosis. And he doesn't realize he's playing this game. Anyway, so the one thing I want to ask is, what does he bring in with him? And there's this one moment, and maybe that's why he loses, because he brings in something with him. And one moment where that's kind of revealed is when he sits them down and he plays blackjack with them right at the beginning. Okay. And he's, in a weird way, Nurse Ratched. He's trying to organize something. He's trying to impose a kind of like order and logic on proceedings. And he's getting kind of wound up when they won't pay attention to it. So he's trying to do something that Nurse Ratched is actually already good at, managing them, controlling their appetites, their desires, their ambitions, their sense of reality. And when he loses it with that guy Martini, because Martini doesn't know how to place the bet properly, he says, "Would you shut up? Bro? These people here, they're the real people. They're the real ones. That's what real people look like." And you think, okay, that's a deliberate piece of scripting that's kind of like philosophy disguised as hyperbole. Yeah. What I mean by that is that the person writing that script is actually really saying he thinks these are real. Part of the worldview of McMurphy is to think that the people who are playing the game are real, and the people who don't know how to play are not real. That's part of his metaphysics, his cosmology, and that's why it's in the script in that deliberately hyperbolic form. But it's disguised. We think he's just being like, "Oh, you're an idiot." They're the ones who are only playing. But he doesn't say that. He says something quite bizarre if you think about it. But that's not like English slang. It's not like he's saying something that has a metaphysical force. So why does he call them the real people? What baggage is he bringing in with him? What preconceptions he brought in with him to call them the real people? Well, again, I don't know. I don't have like a definitive answer to this. But that's part of the reason why he loses, because he brings this other sense of reality that doesn't belong in this place. And maybe there's some sense in which it's kind of tainted as well. It's like, if you can pay, you play, but that play means to exist, to live, and I think it's like what Wittgenstein says about learning a language, of like being like learning a game, and many of his little examples, and his examples are actually quite like that. So Wittgenstein will imagine trying to teach someone to count, and he imagines this person teaching someone to count to 100, and he's like, fucking finally, I've taught this guy to count to 100. And when the student gets to 100, he says 102, 104, 106, and the guy's like, "Oh no, my work is not done," because he's got some weird way of thinking that's made him believe that when you get to 100, you have to start counting in twos for some reason. And then Wittgenstein says, "I immediately see the mistake he's made, but I don't see immediately how to set him right." Okay, and almost a moment like that happens with McMurphy and Martini. Martini finally lets Martini play. Martini gets a 20 on blackjack, and he says, "Hit me." And he's like, "You can't. I'm not going to hit you. You got 20." And he's saying, "Hit me. I want another card." Because for him, the game is to have these cards and to say, "Hit me," because that's the fun of the game. And this is the kind of thing that happens all the time when you've got kids. But it means that basically finding your way, again, to go back to Foucault, finding your way around the psychiatric hospital is finding your way around the cosmology, around the reality, around like something that has its own metaphysics, its own dimensions, its own kind of like logic of sense. And that's what makes this duel really, really fucking interesting between him and Nurse Ratched. That it's not just psychological. It's not just enmity between two people. It's something like much richer than that. You can only really get at by studying these little details.
Yeah, but it's also the interruption becomes the point of capture. So this is dramatized, for example, when he's in the pool, and he's having this. So the joust becomes materialized in this kind of tug of war with the with the stick that the attendant has.
Okay.
And and he kind of gives the attendant the stick, the stick back, and he's like, he says something like 68 days, 68 days. And the attendant's like, no, this isn't prison.
Yeah.
You're here until we're good and ready to let you go.
Yeah.
And then so again, it's I think that it materializes in a small scene this way that his interruption, his kind of like small aggravations that I guess he feels are necessary, in a certain way. Like he feels that when he's talking to the dark, he You tell me, he's playing this game where he's well, if I'm just completely normal, then they'll send me back to prison. So I have to make these little kind of aggravations. But in making these aggravations, these interruptions, they become precisely like the point of capture. And that's it. I don't know. I think it's a beautiful materialization of it, when he's kind of like poking the guy, and then he like lets the thing go, and it's as if he's released. And that's when this revelation like hits him like an anvil. That no, like he doesn't have a sentence. And then I guess just another point of that is that the play on the words of the name, Nurse Ratchet. I mean, what is a ratchet? It's something that you use to, like to lift a car, for example, to change the tire. You use a ratchet. It's this. It's like something that applies pressure, applies torque.
But ratchet is also in American English. It's also like slum. It's like a slum person. No? Like at least in West Coast.
Yeah, I think that's like a new. That's like maybe. A new hip hop thing.
Maybe.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think there's this whole thing where he thinks he's playing the game at a minimal level to secure his objectives. But actually, that minimal playing, firstly, they lead him into explosive reactions, and they become precisely the kind of the handle upon which psychiatric power kind of like grabs hold of him and pulls himself into this institution, such that like Jakob was saying, it almost becomes like a kind of home. He almost becomes like one, not one with, but he begins in a certain way with his his excursions and his interludes and his interruptions. He finds like a profound kind of like joy and satisfaction in there. But in the end, it's almost the greatest lesson of ancient history. He becomes hubristic. He goes too far, and his going too far has these this disastrous consequence of Billy's suicide, and that's the moment when really he could leave the institution, but decides to attack Nurse Ratchet.
Yeah, I think like again I'm not going to talk long, but the subtlety of the direction is such that it's almost as if the psychiatric hospital exists in a kind of different state of temporality to the rest of the world, such that as soon as he takes off those handcuffs and starts whooping and reading around in circles like a kind of a horse made to neigh, for the pleasure of children, the attendant, the kind of scrawnier attendant that we see a lot of, because he's got some really interesting like facial gestures throughout, he has the kind of almost like a Sybil's knowledge of what's going to happen. And he just looks at him and he's just like, there's this moment where the camera just shows us the attendant's reaction to him going around in circles, like a sort of rodeo star, and he's just like this, but without even the head shake. There's just something he can do with his eyes, this actor, it's almost like, you shouldn't be doing that. It's not a moment for celebration, And I just think that's kind of wonderful. That's wonderful as well, because he is the kind of demented staff worker, in the Foucault sense of demented, someone who is absolutely in accord with the clockwork of the system, and so is now in the kind of like opposite of Nietzsche's sense, beyond good and evil, and that's like made clear because there's a moment at the beginning where Banzini is like walking around and he's saying, no, come on, just sit down now, and then there's that guy who's dancing with himself, and he goes over and he's like, come on, you're going to wear yourself out, and the guy doesn't stop dancing. He just begins really slowly again, because he's going to get cranked up over a long period of time. So this guy just exists again in that perfect demented state, just calming things down, making sure that nothing bubbles over, So he's the one that knows the system because he is it, he incarnates it. And in that, everything you just said there, Luke, is like in that first glance of the face, which suggests that it's like, in a kind of classic tragic way, it already happened. It's already occurred.
Can we read the
Yeah, let's do it.
the
Yeah.
following part of the script? I also want to just bookmark something. There is really this sense of home is interesting. I think here, like let's return to it afterwards. But yeah, the homeliness of the ward, or like, I mean, especially in relation to psychiatric power, and also, of course, this is way later, right? But where we've had other developments in psychiatry, but just as a just to hinge it on something, the fact that he discovers McMurphy that you're here voluntarily. Like there's so many, the majority are not confined in that sense, right? They're there by their own free will, But yeah, well, whatever. Can return to that later.
And yeah. No, we'll return to that later.
Well, I'll just read the. All right.
Are you reading it all? Oh no, shit, no. Okay, all right. Yeah, I see.
I'll read the instructions, but I don't think I'm going to read your names. You can do that yourself, right?
Oh well, yeah. I don't think we need the names.
Yeah. Interior, Dr. Spivy's office, day. Dr. Spivey.
Wait, sorry. 1 second. I say we just say Luke is McMurphy and I'm Dr. Spivey. So then we don't need to keep saying,
No,
I'm
exactly.
Dr. Spivey.
You don't need to.
And you're McMurphy.
Yeah. All right. Dr. Spivey is seated behind his desk, on which are several glass-framed photos of Spivey's family, plus a nameplate. John M. Spivey, MD, and McMurphy's papers. McMurphy, freshly showered and wearing hospital-issue clothes, sits facing him.
Hell, Doc. I've been everything from hoopla man with a 2-bit carny show to a top mechanic and bull goose cat skinner. For every gyro logging operation in the Northwest till the Army taught me what my natural bent was.
Oh, and what was that?
Poker.
I see.
Yeah, but you know how society persecutes a dedicated man.
In what way?
They say I'm a habitual hassler. Like I've had some. Shit. They didn't mind so much when I was a dumb logger and got into a hassle. That's a hard-working fella blowing off steam, they say. But if you're a gambler, all you have to do is spit slatways and you're a goddamn criminal.
I see.
To tell the truth, ever since I found my natural calling, I've done time in so many small-time jails I could write a brochure.
Yes. And do you know why you are here?
Well, Doc, doesn't it say so there?
Well, according to the warden at Pendleton, you were a disturbing influence on others. And I read, it appears that there is a potential in him for instigating a revolt among the other inmates. What do you think of that report, Mr. Murphy?
I don't, Doc.
Arrested on an assault charge 5 times.
That's correct, Doc.
The doctor at the prison states, don't overlook the possibility that this man may be faking psychosis to escape the drudgery of the work farm. What do you say to that?
Doc, what can I tell you?
It seems you have no other psychiatric history, Mr. Murphy.
No, this is my first trip, Doc.
Well, you're here for a 90-day observation period, Mr. McMurphy. I'd like you to understand you are here on a court order and we are responsible to the state. So I'd like your cooperation.
You bet, Doc.
Good.
I think we should see if we can do the scene 30 later on, but it's a longer one. But it could be. I think if the vibe is there, it could be cool.
Have we got any water up in this club or tea or something?
Got some caffeinated water for you.
It's very interesting because I think the actual scene is much better than that.
Mm.
You know, McMurphy is kind of cartoonish in this. You know? And
Right, but
whatever,
as we were talking about before, it's him who brings up his past, right? He's like poker, the logging, like we actually learn loads of stuff about him in this scene, right?
yeah.
And then they have just chosen to do something completely different. Just
Yeah,
remove it.
but it is there. They've absorbed it. You know, they've kind of like metabolized this scene and just displaced it and put it in different, presented it in different ways. But what they're missing is that quite like, I don't know how to read that scene, but it seems to me very important. The scene about the fishing photograph. You know, Dr. Spivey has got a picture of him holding, some huge fish, and McMurphy says, "It must be what, 40 pounds?" You know. And he's like 32, and he's like, "Well, you didn't. There's a big chain you got there. You didn't weigh the chain as well, did you?" All this kind of stuff, and I think part of it, at least, and it's only part, but links back to what Luke was saying. This idea that he's kind of mocking the doctor, you know, playing games with him, like doing what he'd do in the pub when you got some like newcomer or someone who isn't as fast a drawer as you with the witticisms, with the banter. So he's kind of running rings around him, and so there is a kind of elation there, but at the same time, you just think that, well, there's something about it. It's like you can see that the ones and zeros in the doctor's head as he's converting this into his own language, and I think that is part of like he's not at home anymore, and it's quite clear even from that moment, or he's wherever he's not in his usual habitat.
You were saying that the doctor is played by an actual psychiatric director.
Yeah. So the hospital where they filmed the film, where they shot the film, Dr. Spivey is the doctor, is the director of the hospital. Which is like a small curio.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing in these like the enactment of doctors, which we have now quite some experience. It's just interesting that they chose to have a real doctor. I think he's an interesting character because now we are very far away, I feel, from the character of Charcot, of like Pinel and Escurial and all these peeps. I mean, now we have entered into a different kind of era of the doctor, I feel.
No, but I think that's actually how psychiatric power starts, right? It starts with Mad King George, and it's all about the attendants and I think at this point he's making a point more about the kind of abstract nature of disciplinary power. But nonetheless, there isn't in the archives that Foucault brings up, like at the very start of psychiatric power. There isn't like there isn't like a diagnosis, there isn't a scene of, it's just, he is, mad. And then the only kind of communication that he receives is from these attendants. And then we receive like the instructions of the attendants. But kind of in a similar way in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the doctor's will is kind of there, but it's only there insofar as it's enacted by this like network of other people. And that's why it's such a useful, that's why psychiatric power is such a useful text to get to, like Foucault's notion of micro power, that power is kind of everywhere, that power is like infrastructural. He's when he talks about kind of micro power, he's talking precisely about like maybe the slight way that we talked about before, where the attendant just slightly calms down the guy who's dancing. The point is that the will of the director is to have calm, regularity, routine, order, and then you have like a kind of like a hierarchy of like relays or nodes for that will or for that power. So so the first being like Nurse Ratchet, who actually exercises an extraordinary amount of power, to the extent that it's only on her instruction that he's actually kept there. The director wants to let him go, but then so you have like you have Nurse Ratchet, you have the attendant, you have the secondary nurse, and so the point is that it's this notion of like cutting off the king's head, is this notion of like the body of power. So that power exists, not it's not kind of like embodied in this individual called the director, who comes in, who instructs, who the director needs like he has his committee of colleagues as well. So and that's almost like the kind of kingly court. And then you have like the chief kind of executor, who's Nurse Ratchet. And then you have her assistant, Nurse Pilbow, and then you have the attendants who are kind of like the muscle in the scenario. But like fundamentally the power is not interned within the director. The power is infrastructural, and it kind of spreads through the individual kind of subjectivities. Well, it's what I went on a long time about ages ago, the subject function coupling. So it's like the extent to which that they fulfill this overarching order envisaged by the director, that the power, which is in fact abstract, is effectuated.
I mean, I would agree 100%. I think my observation was more on maybe the ideals permeating the role of the doctor, or the kind of the role, I would say, the character of the doctor at this moment in time. I'm just thinking about how that particularly has shifted, and there has been a certain development now from the time when Foucault wrote, and how much there is this emphasis on like the doctor bending the will of the patient, and the doctor just exercising purely his will directly on the patient. And of course then there is this layer of kind of the infrastructure that is there, but there is this clear sense that the doctor has this active agency of like bending the patient, conforming the patient to his will, right? And I'm not saying at all that I totally agree with you, but there is this vibe in him, that he's this kind of soft-spoken, like humanist doctor, in a sense, that he's like, I mean, maybe we can even approach like the ideas of autonomy and capacity almost through him. I mean, maybe not really yet, but there is this kind of softness around him in his portrayal, I think, at least, that is interesting. Like he almost strikes you as a kind of intellectual, the doctor, I think, in a softer way. He's not like this kind of cardinal, like punisher in the same way that that Foucault at least picks out these doctors from the older archives.
Well, yeah, but I think what that just speaks to is a more advanced stage of disciplinary power, where the abstract power is kind of taken stronger control, and so the need for the figurehead has become less and less. But if you remember in the scene with the electroconvulsive therapy, then he's present.
No, but exactly, there's so many double things, and he also does strut around in the hospital in this kind of way where this is his body, and he's surveying the patient, and very much embodying so many of the other ideals, I think, that Foucault or mechanisms that he.
I think only thing I'd say is that I remember actually in Foucault, you have this one moment where they talk about the amount of time that a doctor spends with each patient, and it's something like 8 minutes a year, and that is said explicitly in Foucault. So he struts, he does his thing called the visits, where it's this kind of moment of showmanship where he kind of struts or catwalks through the hospital in this kind of pageant of authority. But that's only to remind everyone that he's there. He doesn't actually see the patients there. He doesn't actually, conduct an analysis or have a personal conversation with them. And this stuff about like the doctor bending the patient with his will Well, I feel like the doctor's body, which has to be stellar, he has to be a stallion, he has to be a kind of paragon of manliness. Yeah. Well, that's just so that it's like the perfect piece of equipment for psychiatric power to use as its medium, its sort of form of expression. It's not like the doctor's personal will, I think that's important. And I know you didn't mean that, but I just thought that, that's important to bring out. So one of the things that I think is actually quite amazing, and I didn't see this the first time, and I think lots of the stuff written about the evil of Nurse Ratched misses this, which is that she's not evil in like some conventional sense. She's not the devil, yeah, or not in any ordinary form or any the form with which we're most familiar, because she doesn't. There's no like smirk, when she uses a piece of disciplinary apparatus in order to subjugate or teach McMurphy. There's no like little sneer of sadistic sneer, You think about, I don't know, like someone, again, it's a kind of cartoon version of evil, but Dolores Umbridge in Harry Potter. Yeah. She's someone that uses the bureaucratic apparatus with pleasure, She enjoys like crushing people. She enjoys kind of neutralizing, the effervescence of youth. Nurse Ratched doesn't actually do that. My sense of what Nurse Ratched is, and it's a bit like when Foucault says that the psychiatric hospital is a kind of factory for producing madness. Yeah. Nurse Ratched is like one with her role, one with this infrastructural, to use Luke's term, position of infrastructural power. And she looks at McMurphy and says, my job is to like produce madness, And she looks at him almost like a, ornithologist might look at an exotic bird, a rare species. And it's like, there's something here, or like a football scout might look at a really great young footballer, on doing, cutting certain angles or seeing certain passes and stuff. She's like, I've got an interesting specimen here, You've given me a job, doctor, and that's to make madness. And I think I can make madness here. I think I could grow a new kind of madness. I can see, that this is promising soil, because her face is always placid and sometimes actually quite almost not exactly tender, but concerned, And her attitude often seems to be one of like, again, I don't know how to exactly say this, but it's not, I've won, I've beaten you or something. It's more that, no, this is the way things work here, and this is I'm subjecting you to these rules because they are time-honored rules and they've been proven to work in the production of madness. Okay, and that is why you're here. So I can produce madness in you, or I can, I can turn you into a madman.
Let me polarize a little bit. Maybe it's something that isn't polarizing, but on the note of the personal in the doctor, and in this reading of what you called Nurse Ratched, I feel that there is a way in which, at least I really easily can I think I'm inclined to read Nurse Ratched as kind of sympathetic also to McMurphy. Like even drawn to him in a certain way that, she's like reluctantly charmed by him, and she has some sort of, she cares for him in some way. There's this sense, at least to me when I interpret it, is that, wow, it's almost as if, wow, you could have been like this, kind of really flamboyant, attractive man, and now you're just this kind of brutish, I don't know what to call him, but like almost like a drunk, or I don't know, like some kind of a brute. But then and so that's one level to the kind of humanizing of her in a sense. And then the other thing is like, well, but okay, the doctor's personal will. Well, I would say yes, it clearly is there, and it does have, it exerts power in the power, or in this infrastructure. And I wouldn't say yes, it fits like hand in glove inside the psychiatric apparatus, but is it a product only of the psychiatric apparatus? Well, I don't know.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I mean, just quickly, I think I agree with you up until the point where you said you know, she thinks he could have been this charismatic man. You know,
Mm.
I don't think she has thoughts about the outside with respect to the people that appear in front of her,
That's
or
fair
not,
enough. Yeah.
or not as a space where they could ever go to. You know, there's this. So that's one thing, and I'd say that she does embody an evil, but it's an infrastructural evil. It's the evil of the administrative system itself. You know, and what this is Nurse Ratched is kind of Kafkaesque in that other sense of the Kafkaesque, in that her modes of concern have been hijacked by the institution, or they're utterly expressive of the institution. You know, her interest, you know, in McMurphy is precisely, you know, psychiatric in form. You know, it is institutional in form. Her concern for him, her care for him, is bureaucratic in form, institutional in form. So and that's what I think is particularly interesting about her particular brand and type of evil. That it doesn't need this cartoonish excess where she like, you know, I know that's like a ridiculous form of it, but you know, anything that approaches that, she's never like that. Even that scene which is like incredibly brilliant, where he's the second vote, you know, for watching the World Series, where he gets all 9 votes, you know. And why does it? First, he gets all 9 votes. Why? Because he's laid down a kind of potlatch, hasn't he? He tried to rip up the water fountain, you know, and he goes out and he says, "Well, at least I tried. At least I fucking tried." And they all feel ashamed of themselves. So now they have to play like the next side of the potlatch by putting their hands up. So he did that, but then he falls into Nurse Ratched's like trap. So you have to ask, what's the meaning of this trap? You know, he doesn't get a majority. He only gets 9, but because there are another 9 nutters, you know, whatever they are, they're called the chronics, you know, in the background who don't have the capacity to vote. And then eventually, whilst he's trying to get them to vote, again, I'm repeating stuff you remember obviously very vividly, but when he's trying to get the others to vote, he's going over to Bancini, he's going over to the guy that dances with himself, trying to get them to understand. She adjourns the meeting, you know, and this is like an important part of bureaucratic power, isn't it? You know, to have an opening of the meeting and the closure of the meeting, and for that to have significance, you know, this is a particular time that's set aside from the ordinary workaday routine. You know, this is I don't know, a kind of almost like a space protected by ritual, you know, and the things that happen here can only happen under the protection, under the aegis of ritual. So is her game to spite McMurphy? I think not. When she eventually says, "Look, I've got the final vote from the chief," you know, and she says, "I'm sorry, the meeting was adjourned." And at the point when the meeting was adjourned, you only had 9 votes, you know. So what's the meaning of this lesson, you know? You know, the lesson in probably like the strongest form of that. I'll teach you a lesson. That kind of thing. Well, what is the meaning of that? Well, I think it's like you don't know where you are. You know, you have to understand where you are. You know. Otherwise, we're talking, next to one. No, we're talking at cross purposes. You know, we're missing one another. We're not inhabiting the same reality. So, in order to talk to me, you must exist where we are now. You know, you can't exist in your fairy tale world. You can't exist, you know, in this other reality that you've brought in with you. And I think that fits in with this Kafkaesque reading of Ratched. You know, she's not getting joy in that moment. She's just trying to teach him where he is. Whatever that means, but I think that's an institutional evil. I think that's an infrastructural evil. So I'm not getting rid of the concept of evil. I'm just saying that it's about being precise about what kind of evil is manifested.
It almost reminds me of trying to read a book in a bar in Copenhagen on a Friday night, you know.
You don't know where you are.
This is Denmark. This is Friday. This is not the time for reading. No, yeah, but I think, you know, there is like a, you know, when we were talking earlier about like the kind of like fractalization of the asylum, there's something asylum like of, you know, of all bureaucracies, in the sense that they kind of like, they're constantly diagnostic. They're obsessed with the dossier. They're obsessed with procedure and with like lack of friction. I remember a good example would be like how insurance is the insurance business is conducted. So insurance is like one of the oldest kind of financial institutions, especially shipping insurance, because it's related to empire and to the transport of colonial goods. And I remember talking to one of my friends who was insurance about I don't know, some ideas I had about like bureaucracy and terminal bureaucracy, and he was saying, yeah, like you could come up with some wild new idea that could make a company a fortune and could like revolutionize the insurance business, but it would just never be accepted. It wouldn't be legible to them, because it would interfere with the kind of smooth running of the operation. And that to me, that there's almost a way in which Nurse Ratched is kind of like a I don't know, like the manager of like a train station. It's the things that bother her are kind of like flow, friction, the right point at which energy is released. So there is like a space of relaxation. That's the pool. There is a space of expression. That's the group therapy. There is a space for sleep, and that's the bedroom. And then and she really strongly affirms like that. When they're kind of like starting to ask questions of her. Well, why are things like this? Why are things like that? And one of the things is like, why are the dorms locked during the day? And and she just kind of like, yeah, she just becomes this almost like numb node of a certain kind of bureaucratic power that I think is far in excess of the psychiatric, where it's, oh well, of course, if I was to leave the door open, well, you might just go in and sleep all day, and then you'd be alone, and and being alongside people is good for you. It's therapeutic, and it's almost this thing where just the very functioning of the institution itself is assumed without like a intervention to take on automatic operations and automatic effects, and then anything that kind of intervenes with those kind of effects are what the attendants are for, right? They're there to kind of like to smooth the edges, to like I don't know, they're almost like what's that game you play on where you have like the brick on ice, and you have the people who like sweep the ice.
Curling.
Yeah. The attendants are almost like the sweepers in curling. They're like scrubbing the ice so that the thing it glides to just the perfect point. But there is just to bring it up before I forgot it.
That's really one second, because that's really funny, because I actually used that exact metaphor today to describe my own behaviour in relation to my family. But I was precisely the guys. And
Are you actually a curling parent?
Yeah, no, I'm saying that sometimes it's about like, well, actually to relate to all the fiasco that's going on at the moment, with this idea, you've got to try and just get these people smoothly through the day, in their current condition, in their current wounded state, And I'm like the guy sweeping out the curling pitch to make the whatever it is. What do you call it? The curling? What is the thing called?
Wait,
you
don't have the expression in English.
What?
A curling parent.
No, that's interesting.
No, it's Swedish, because Sweden is quite good at curling, so that's why I guess. But it's funny. to spoil the kid is to be a curling parent. It's to do all the
For me, I mean, absolutely nothing to do with that. It's more like it's closer to the attendant thing.
Yeah.
That these guys are mad, and I'm trying to get them from one end of the day to the other. At least if I can get them to the sanity of sleep. But whatever, describing my particular situation. But I just think it's kind of hilarious that I actually used it today.
But what's
going on there?
You said something about not forgetting.
Yeah. No, so I was just going to say about this notion of the production of madness, and that, well, of course, it's almost like a kind of like auto-rationalization, where the madness must be produced because that's the basis upon which the institution is justified to exist. And And so just like a historical point about that, and what I think is a shame, like, or like a missed opportunity with the film, is that the film doesn't depict at all. Of course you have McMurphy, but McMurphy is a very kind of exuberant character. He fights, he fucks, he's but they don't just have like normal people who are kind of trapped in there. I think that's like a small missing element, and it goes back to this problem I talked about before, that relates to this a person with like an eccentricity who might at a particular moment of exaggeration come into contact with like an agent of a disciplinary institution, like a police officer, and the very presence of that police officer might kind of like enrage them further. And then that police officer might be then that, oh, well, obviously this person's kind of like they're psychotic, they did it, and then they get arrested and evaluated, and then they end up in this weird situation where they're actually like a regular regular girl, regular dude, regular person, but in order to be like liberated from their confinement, madness has to be in some way produced. That like the object of madness has to be latched upon, and so there are some people who resist this and who are just like, I'm not going to give you this diagnosis that you seek, and I'm not going to show these improvements, I'm going to refuse to play the game. But then there are other people who they realize that this game is being played, and they kind of they simulate the madness in order to escape confinement in and through the diagnosis. But the thing that I was just going to bring up about this notion of producing madness is that at the kind of like the moment of absolute crisis of the film, it isn't the carnival the night before. It's the moment when Nurse Ratched comes, and she's confronted with this scene of like, for her, like chaos, absolute disorder, and
her smudged hat.
Yeah, and and her hat smudged, and it's funny that she asks, who is it? Is it man? Who's the guy that Danny DeVito plays?
Martini.
Yeah. She asks Martini, and what's interesting about she asks him because he's not the one who's closest to the hat. So it's even like in asking him to get the hat, she's kind of like re-articulating her kind of spatial order. It's like, you have to move in these directions in order to fulfill my will. And then she immediately says to when she finds Billy, and that's when Billy really goes mad and commits suicide, and starts like hitting himself and being like, no, and this is kind of like McMurphy's moment of realization, almost of his own hubris, that he's taken this thing too far. It's almost like the moment at the end of Euripides, the Bacchae, where they're in this kind of like bacchanalian, what would you say, kind of like fugue state, and then the woman realizes that the head of this person that she's chopped off is her own son's. And this is to me, there's a similar moment here with McMurphy, because there's this moment when he looks and he's like, fuck, like
there's something he didn't know here.
Yeah. There's a boundary that he's just like took like way too far.
Just an anecdote from before, like about the Nurse Ratched and these roles. It's just an anecdote from Laborde, like the psychiatric kind of institution in France, where Guattari, and I can't remember, was it Ori or Orly? I can't remember what the other guy's name is. But where they would have like the schedule that would like regulate everyone's work, right? This kind of rota, but which would be displayed in I guess in some kind of office or in the hall or something, would be a constant rotation of roles in some periods. I'm not sure they always did that, but they did a bit like we're doing now with the seminar. There was always a rotation between roles, like, so no one would ever get stuck being only attendant or only Nurse Ratched or something like this. Just an interesting measure, I guess, they took to kind of avoid this, right? And then what the fuck was the other thing? Yeah, the other thing is I was thinking about um, the production of madness and Nurse Ratched, but also the this. I guess this is a very thing maybe to pose to a real psychiatrist or someone who works in a psychiatric institution. I mean, there is also this thing of the psychiatric institution to work in such a way that it is constructed also demands superhuman patience and kind of generosity in some ways to a person if one isn't fully disciplinarian and follows all the rules and accepts being a cog in the machine kind of. But not doing that is to lend so much patience in the concrete actual situation of okay, so this person, for example, of course, yeah, if we unlock all the doors, yeah, sure, we can do that, but likelihood is very high that this person is going to do this thing that we know that the person usually does, right? But of course they should be entitled to choose themselves. And then they repeat it, right? And then they repeat it a second time a week later, or they repeat it a third time, and it's just this interesting mechanism of having not worked with this. And the infrastructures are very different depending on a big institution, a small institution, and all these things, right? But I think this must just be this thing that every day confronts people, or I guess doesn't confront if if you're very used to it and you're just kind of taken and assumed a particular role or a particular relationship to it. But being awake to this fact, I think, is very exhausting.
What's
I
the thing
guess.
exactly you're saying every day they're confronted with?
I think this dilemma, I think in medicine maybe we have a different, or there are several different dilemmas, right? But not wanting to produce madness and sort of given agency and space and yeah, autonomy in a sense, I guess, but in a real sense, not in this well, go and do your optimized life. But you always have this choice of okay, should I trust the patient to be capable of things that my experience says that they're not really capable of, for example, they want to be in their room all day, and then the experience is that, well, fuck, they really struggle with that. They say they want that, and then after a while it goes really bad. They start doing something that in the end then hurts themselves, right? And I'm just, does it make sense, or I can maybe explain it a different way? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah. I get what you're trying to say. I just wanted to know, I just wanted to see some sort of vivid instance of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, help me come up with one. I can't really think of one on top of my head, But maybe let's say the example of someone who goes into, someone who wants to go to leave the hospital, the asylum, the institution, and go into the city,
Yeah, okay.
And the likelihood maybe of them getting involved in something there that results in them, grabbing the attention of the police or doing something that in some way is actually going to damage them more. Of course, we can discuss, yes, is it their own will? There's the pleasure in that, blah, blah, blah. Is that better that they can do whatever the fuck they want? But in this kind of pragmatism of but if there is someone who maybe isn't, confined very hardly and strapped and all these things, or or drugged down so they can't do anything. And I guess there is just this moment where as some kind of worker in a psychiatric hospital, you always face this conflict, right? Should I constrict, or should I, give less freedom now? Almost like with kids, in a similar way, but knowing that there is a high probability that something goes wrong here. That isn't always. I mean, I'm not referring to going against the rules as such. I'm just referring to, will they feel, I don't want my medication. Okay, cool. Well, fuck the medication, and then well, okay, if we just stop the medication, there are all these withdrawal symptoms, for example. Or I mean, there's so many different ways we could, and so many different scenarios with different dilemmas in. But
But
Yeah, I get exactly what you're saying. Yeah, okay.
I think what's missing is the broader historical context that's going to come up, which is okay. At what point in history does the asylum emerge? Well, it's at the same time as the industrial city. And what is the industrial city? Well, the industrial city is itself a kind of space of like confinement, where there isn't space for kind of like freedom and play and mischief, and even when it is, it's kind of like regulated or supervised or controlled in some way. And so so that's what I was talking about, and this notion of like the asylum is almost kind of like the opposite space now. It's like the mad people for me are these kind of like demented people who can just live, who can just go and like have their like bullshit chit chat and go to work and go home and and live this kind of like regular and orderly life. That to me is like a form of insanity, like, a life without play, without richness, without kind of conflict, without confrontation of just the very fact that we're mortal, that okay, so why do these rules exist? For whom? For what reasons? Why do we have to do these things? Who did they? Without asking any of these questions. And so then the asylum, the space of confinement, well, it actually becomes a place for the people who they feel deeply, or they feel richly, or they feel kind of confined in the ostensible space of freedom. And so then they have to be confined in a sense, because they pose like a risk of contagion or danger, which is like an issue that will like come up, I think, much more strongly later on. But in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that's the core question that is posed in these these like psychiatric reviews. It's like, is he mad or is he dangerous? And well, if he's dangerous, we still have to do something with him. And that's when Ratchet kind of reaffirms that no, we keep him here. We don't pass him along and pass the book, like everyone else does. No. We keep him here because we can really help him. But then what is that help? Well, that help is only to as it kind of says in the screenplay, where he's like what is it? It's where he says I fight some. They didn't mind so much when I was a dumb logger and got into a hassle. That's a hard-working fella blowing off steam. So right. What does in the end the psychiatric institution exist to do? Well, it exists to reinsert you into this, what for a lot of people is an increasingly intolerable normality. And I think that's only accelerated with social media and the kind of information world. So like regional differences have become much less or have almost collapsed. And I'd say outside of like that kind of rude boy culture in London is still like very much a thing. But then if you think of the elements that constitute and motivate that, the music is the same as Want Away Kids in Copenhagen or in Paris or in Athens or in Buenos Aires, and the clothing, the modes of behavior, like the forms of mischief. Like we've just reached just this stage of kind of like hyper-normalization where there's even less space than before. There's even less space to be exactly, different.
Yeah.
And then the space in which there is to be different, even though it's kind of like a form of fool's gold. It's like chasing the dragon. It's like, okay, well, you can go into this space and have freedom and make money and hustle and have a YouTube channel or be a rapper or do something like this. But like in the end, it's only ever kind of in service of something over which you have no control. And I think that's the kind of the call it like the madness of Kanye West or You know, when Kanye West becomes, let's just say, like a very kind of like jilted, you know, kind of like angular, aggressive, angry person. I think it's at this moment when he realizes that, I mean, well, I guess he thought that his genius and his hustle, you know, he believed in this American, like it could get him to the top. And then he kind of got to the top, but it was only like a kind of monetary, you know, it was only to have things to buy, you know, it wasn't actually to have power or control, you know, to be able to, you know, because really like what we do as children is it's kind of boring to like to play a game, you know. If you notice, and I'm sure Patrick will have a lot to say about this, but what a lot of children's play involves is actually setting the rules of the game and reformulating the game and like making up like new rules, you know, and kind of having a game that like the I don't know, like the structure and form of the game itself is the kind of jouissance of the game. You know, it isn't just for you know, for the child before they enter into a space, and then you know the great games, or you know the games that are the most popular. So say like Formula One, football, cricket, tennis. You know, in all of these games, there is a certain space in which the rules have like a formality that gives space to like redefine the game. You know, so if you think like in cricket, when I was showing you that thing about the, you know, when the introduction of fast bowling, then recently there's been like baseball. You know, in football, you've had like the Guardiola revolution. In tennis, there's a David Foster Wallace article about like, you know, the power play baseline game. So it's like, and then the game becomes dull. You know, so there was this huge conversation in England in football, for example. They were saying, "Oh, the game's boring," you know, and City are winning all the time, and da 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 da. But actually, I don't think it was that City were winning all the time. I think it was that all of the other teams were beginning to play like City. And then the game became exciting again when, you know, managers like Klopp and Slot and, well, you know, like the two Liverpool managers, managers like the, you know, the guy who was at Bournemouth, the guy who's at Newcastle, you know, started playing like a variant, you know, that included like, yeah, fundamentally there's something about these games where the joy of the game is the reinvention of the game through the kind of either the getting rid of old rules or the reintroduction of new rules. And I think you see that in a very pure sense in children, when children play.
Can I get in here? Maybe Patrick, I don't know if you have something to say about the game, but just quickly, this state of hypernormalization, I think you said it, but just to emphasize it, like between the lines, in a way, to then fall out of this hypernormalization in a sense, or as soon as one steps out for a second, I mean, the fall is like so much more severe, right? Or so much greater that to like start sliding just a little bit becomes fucking scary. Like, I mean, I think it's very like clear in let's say social media, in the universe of social media, like, okay, you know, you're off for a week, you're not posting anything for a week. Wow, the algos can just change, you know, your followers are going to be redirected to another account or something like this, right? Or with Kanye, like, oh, just one slip and he's like a Nazi, or I mean, without saying much about that, but just observing that it doesn't take much to just fall out of the kind of hypernormalization, or even a more basic example of, like, you know, a very normalized life, and then met with something that just sits a little bit outside of that. All of a sudden it shakes you quite hard, because somehow the I don't know what to call them, but like the boundaries, or the kind of the margins almost have like shrunk, and it's as if any movement sideways or in any direction is like you know, detrimental in a way.
You know, it's the whole like highlights reel of episodes of Being in France is going through my head now. But I don't know if I have enough energy to control that storm, you know, distill it down into a series of anecdotes. Yeah. It's just like, you know, this constant thing, like, you know, you talk, you think that you're having this ordinary conversation, in a way, a bit like the energy of McMurphy. And you know, it's like there's some big bogey dangling down from my nose or something, and that's the way in which people are looking at me, you know, or as if I were actually, you know, saying all kinds of things I didn't know I was saying, you know, talking to I thought I was talking to some lady about philosophy, but really I was commenting on the shape of her ass, you know, like, you know, that's the kind of like look that I see here on her face, one of like being shocked and appalled. and it's like, and it has to do with sliding, because again, I don't want to be like too much like blowing my own trumpet or whatever it is, or trying to like write like little panegyrics for my own style of life, but whatever. You choose a life because you think it's the best, yeah. But I think that we live in this world where even reading and thinking are forms of sliding, you know, in your sense, Jakob, yeah. You become by reading and thinking, you become out of the game. So whenever you talk, you start blindsiding people, you know. It's like you've just done a sort of like leg sweep, and they don't understand why you've done that. You know, they feel like by simple conversation makes them feel exposed or naked or like concussed, and that's like really, really fucking disturbing state to be in, because then you think that you're like this traveler. Like I love this story about like finding you know, like one of the first, like one of the big like awakenings, part of like paleontology or whatever that science is, you know, the sort of like, how should I put it, a sort of primal anthropology, you know, an anthropology of prehistory. I don't know what name to give that, but I remember reading something about this idea of like one of the first awakenings of consciousness was through like bitter herbs. Okay, and what they'd found is they had this campsite, and they had like, you know, they studied like the remains of the people that lived in this campsite, and then amongst the remains they found herbs that would only have existed, you know, about 150 miles away from that campsite, you know. So someone had gone out 150 miles, you know, found these bitter herbs and brought them back, you know, to like, you know, set consciousness on fire, basically, yeah, to kind of like bring it into a new, you know, the consciousness like turbocharge, you know, a new refinement of consciousness, a new dimension of sensibility. And when I go like into my whatever, into the kind of like through the black hole of my notebook, you know, and come back out again, you know, with my bitter herbs, I expect like there to be a sort of party to welcome me, you know, people to. I'm bringing back like the spoils and a harvest of goods. I'm like the first guy that came back with Japanese swords and Chinese silks and Indian spices, you know. But it's just it's never like that. It's more like I just, you know, done knocked down ginger and left a turd on their doorstep or something. I can't. Yeah, there you go. I mean, there are many reactions, but one of them definitely is that like a feeling of being attacked, and I think it does come out of like a certain kind of way of talking. But what I really think it comes out of is an intensity in the conversation, like the fact that like, fuck, this guy is actually talking about something that I have to listen to, you know, because he cares about it or something. I don't know, like, because I see it in other people as well. Like I've got friends who are kind of further along the weirdo spectrum than I am, you know. So they how shall I put it? They carry around with them the odors of the underworld, you know, and they like they're some of them are highly like sophisticated, intelligent people in their own right, but people will run a mile from them, you know, because they've got slightly greasy hair or something, or because and mainly this idea of talking feverishly, you know, like a kind of Dostoevskian character. That idea that if you don't listen, I'm going to have to grab your face so that you listen to me. And I don't mean that. I think that's obviously weird, but you know, I mean that they just that's what passion has become. Passion has already become something that people treat a bit like a kind of fungal growth, you know, something that's going to grab hold of them, get its tentacles around them, and so on.
Yeah, but passion and behavior is the same coin in a sense, no? Well, we can discuss if that's true, but if behavior then is, you know, ultimately like modulated, mimicked with, especially with all of our devices and everything, then of course passions are as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Although
it's
again, like,
very directly.
Yeah. Although now I'm thinking like the word passion is just so likely to be misunderstood. Maybe it does have to have this form that makes it at once daunting but also appealing. You know, that's what makes people run a mile. If something is merely ugly, then they're kind of comfortable because they can give it a name. You know, they can dismiss it. It's only when they feel like, to go back to your scenario, when they want to touch the snaky thing, that's when the true horror occurs. You know, you've got this monstrous thing, but what do you want to do with it? I want to touch it. Yeah.
I'm thinking about, because
Oh
it's
mate, I'm
interesting how
like broken today. Fucking hell, I need to.
No. But
Well, we should.
maybe we should round it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had a kind of something about normality, normalcy, and madness. But I think if we open that today, we're gonna go mad. No, but just the use of them, because somehow I feel that they are also very like entrapping. Like they're very kind of capturing these terms. I think it's also when we've spoken lately. You know, I mean, this way that the psychiatric power of, in a sense, I almost feel for me makes me reproduce the vocabulary of madness, where I'm like, but, you know, can we not, or normality for that matter, like. And it's complicated because I would agree, like, yeah, sure, there is, but maybe then is it a process of hyper normalization, or is it a process of optimization? I don't know.
Yeah. Something occurred to me just then.
Yeah.
Like, I was thinking about what Luke was saying before about the absence of ordinary people inside that asylum. You know, that's whatever, psychiatric hospital. Now, considering it's a film, piece of fiction, yeah, and we take it as a kind of allegory, maybe what it's studying, I don't know how to fit all this together, what it's studying is not actually real patients who find themselves in a psychiatric hospital, but like the phantasmagoria of psychiatric power itself. Like, who does psychiatric power think that it's dealing with? Like, what does, like, if you go if you could like get under the bonnet of the ordinary person in the street, you know, Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Jones and Mr. Johnson, yeah, what would, and you looked inside the kind of like their little fantasy of an asylum, who would be in there? Well, those guys, okay, they're part of like the everyman phantasmagoria of madness. Now, the reason why that like I suddenly had that thought is because, I mean, if I'd had time this week, I would love to have written a version of, you know, what's his name again? The guy who's like the most normal in there, who's always talking about his sexual failures with his wife, you know, who's Harding. A bit more Harding, that's it, yeah. When he's like, you know, I'm not talking about my wife, I'm talking about life in general. I'm talking about, you know, how everything fits together. I'm talking about the cosmos, the planets.
Heaven, hell, God.
Yeah.
Oh, he has this legend, or I don't think it's
now,
legend, but he has a funny in the script. Well, go on, Patrick. Maybe we can return.
All I'm trying to say is that really, how do we, should we see that as like, okay, that's what someone in our society looks like, you know? Or is it that when people really do speak with philosophical authority, when people really do come up with, you know, a great interpretation of our culture, yeah, people don't hear the quality of it, the elegance of it, the sophistication. They just hear that gobbledygook. They just hear that babble. So in some way, that guy is not a real, like, you know, madman who's going to be brought into an asylum, you know, and you know, treated and given therapy and given drugs. Really, he's the kind of figment of our imagination that stops us from receiving the real wisdom, you know. I don't know how, does that make sense to you? Yeah. He's like, when you talk, Luke, people hear that man. Okay. When I talk, people hear that man. When Jakob talks, people hear that man, as if we hadn't just said something sensible, thoughtful, wise, eye-opening, but we just said gobbledygook like that. Like, I've had experience of this when I was younger. I remember trying to, you know, diplomatically settle some argument in a bar, you know, and I introduced like Kant's philosophy, and a girl just looked at me disgusted and said, They're just words. They're just words, you know. And you know, in that moment, whatever I said, like you know, and at the time I was proud of myself, you know. but you know, whatever I said sounded to her like Mr. Harding, you know. And so there's a sense in which, yeah, they are like the people standing in the way, so that we can't see the people who are actually behind them. You know, these mad people. And that's why they're not meant to be an ensemble cast plucked out from an actually existing mental or hospital or psychiatric ward. They're meant to be, you know, we're trying to study who are the people that we think are mad, you know, what are the versions of madness that we've currently got in our heads. I don't know how much I agree with that, but there's something there that I want to say. I should be able to think of some better way of saying it. But you know,
Right, do you want to say this and then because I'm super hungry.
Yeah, right. But then let me see if I can read this. I just thought it was a bit funny. Speaking of this thing, although I think, I mean, there is another aspect of what you just said, which I think is a wielding of power, right? Or attributes of power, and to really also dominate through language and through discourse and through knowledge. That's another aspect. But here we have I guess a dilemma with this. So this is Harding from the script, but I think we have something similar in the film. So Harding says, "Yes, thank you, Miss Ratched. Since our last meeting, I have been reflecting, quite seriously, on the nature of my problem. Naturally, I'm referring to the capacity to obtain the necessary results in order to obtain... No, to personify the very existence of that relationship regardless of the function. Regardless of the function, we will confront the question of... Yes, the question of existence, relationship, function, confronting us in the moment of the deepest crisis, yes, the crisis of our souls, which I'm trying to fully understand the problem not to shut ourselves off, but somehow understand fully our capacity to obtain, to personify. The question existence depends on the question to reflect. Well, then his little strange monologue ends there.
Well, one second, because I've got something I just need to. I'm just going to read very, very quickly. So this is from Waiting for Godot. Does everyone know Waiting for Godot? Yeah, played by Beckett. Yeah. Okay. So there's a guy called Lucky. Basically, halfway through the film, there are these two guys, you know, waiting for Godot, blah blah blah, and they have their little, you know, whatever lyrical banter with each other, and they're kind of like comedy of uselessness. And then you've got this guy Pozzo that appears on the horizon, and he's a kind of like a weird amalgam of loads of things, like kind of tyrant, street performer, kind of spiv in a way. And he's carrying this other guy, Lucky, who's a bit like a dog or a bit like a slave. And there's one moment where Lucky finally begins to speak. If I can find it here. Fucking hell, where is it? 1 second. And here it is. Given the existence as uttered forth in the public works of Puncher and Watman of a personal God, qua, with white beard, qua, outside time without extension, who from the heights of divine apatheia, divine athambia, divine aphasia, loves us dearly, with some exceptions, for reasons unknown, but time will tell, and suffers like the divine Miranda, with those for whom reasons unknown, but time will tell, are plunged in torment, plunged in fire, whose fire flames, if that continues, and who can doubt it, will fire the firmament, that is to say, blast hell to heaven, so blue, still, and calm, so calm, with a calm which, even though intermittent, is better than nothing, but not so fast, and considering what is more, that as a result of the labours left unfinished, crowned by the Academy of the Anthropometry of Essie in Posse of Testu and Cunard, it is established beyond all doubt, all other doubt, than that which clings to the labours of men, that as a result of the labours unfinished of Testu and Cunard, it is established, as hereinafter, but not so fast, for reasons unknown, that as a result of the public works of Puncher and Watman, it is established beyond all doubt that in view of the labours of Fartov and Belcher, left unfinished for reasons unknown, of Testu and Cunard, left unfinished, it is established what many deny, that man of Posse, of Testu and Cunard, that man in Essie, that man in short, that man in brief, in spite of the strides of animation and defecation, wastes and pines, and concurrently, simultaneously, what is more for reasons unknown, in spite of the strides of physical culture, the practice of sports such as tennis, football, running, cycling, swimming, flying, floating, riding, gliding, conating, camogie, skating, tennis of all kinds, dying, flying, sports of all kinds, autumn, summer, winter, tennis of all kinds, hockey of all sorts, penicillin, succedanea. In a word, I resume, flying, guiding, gliding, golf over 9 and 18 holes, tennis of all sorts. In a word, for reasons unknown, in Feckham, Peckham, Fulham, Clapham, namely, concurrently, simultaneously, what is more for reasons unknown, but time will tell, fades away, I resume, Fulham, Clapham, in a word, the dead loss per head since the death of Bishop Berkeley, being to the tune of 1 inch 4 ounce per head, approximately, and by and large, more or less, to the nearest decimal, good measure, round figures, stark naked, in the stocking feet in Connemara, in a word, for reasons unknown, no matter what the facts are there, and considering what is more, much more, grave in the light of the labours lost of Steinweg and Peterman, it appears what is more, much more grave than in the light of the labours lost of Steinweg and Peterman, that in the plains, in the mountains, by the seas, by the rivers, running water, running fire, the air is the same, and then the earth, namely the air, and then the earth, in the great cold, the great dark, the air and the earth abode of stones, in the great cold, alas, alas, in the year of the Lord 600 and something, the air, the earth, the sea, the earth, abode of stones in the great depths, the great cold on sea, on land, and in the air, I resume for reasons unknown, in spite of the tennis, the facts are there, but time will tell, I resume, alas, alas, on, in short, in fine, on, abode of stones, who can doubt it? I resume, but not so fast, I resume the skull, fading, and concurrently, simultaneously, what is more for reasons unknown, in spite of the tennis, on the beard, the flames, the tears, the stones, so blue, so calm, alas, alas, on, the skull in Connemara, in spite of the tennis, the labours abandoned, left unfinished, graver, still abode of stones, in a word, I resume, alas, alas, abandoned, unfinished, the skull in Connemara, in spite of the tennis, the skull, alas, the stones, Cunard, the stones, Melly, tennis, the stones, so calm, Cunard, unfinished. And then Pozzo says, his hat! And it ends. But there's something like this kind of like, this incredible bottled energy just over exploding in a kind of verbal froth, you know, this kind of maelstrom of abstractions. I mean, there's something kind of odd going on in the Beckett that's not there in the other one, but in the one who flew over the cuckoo's nest. But Yeah, in the one through the equivalent, I feel like it's the glitching of like thought itself, and there's something similar going on here.
I mean, like, we could speak for like a long time about that. I'd just say that it speaks to me, knowing a little of Beckett's work, that he pulls this maneuver very often, and it's actually kind of like with a certain rhythmic frequency. Like just sonically the maneuvers, and to me it speaks of the kind of, I don't know, like a certain like glib bourgeois virtuosity. It's like the kind of thing that, yes, there is like a beauty to it, but it's a beauty that completely elides and escapes, and it's a beauty that actually kind of exists to be integrated into the circle jerk. It's actually something that precisely in and through it's in eligibility, which to me, like, it's completely legible. I can feel the rhythm and the repetition, and I understand enough about like philosophy and the absurd, but it's that kind of like legible illegibility that allows the kind of the petty bourgeois, the amateur writer to point to and say that's literature. And there's something about that makes me dislike it.
But I think he gives
whilst appreciating it, of course.
But I think he gives it to this lucky guy as well, who can't talk. So that makes me think there's something. I get what you're saying, and I know that, because it's like been infinitely imitated, hasn't it? This idea that all I need to do is just sort of like arrange words in recurrent patterns with variations, and then I'm a writer. And it's been done ad nauseum. And there's something, you're right, kind of it's just kind of frills and lace in that form, isn't it? It's just this kind of like bouquet of nonsense. And I agree, like that, there's something ugly about that. But then if you experience it as precisely failure that he's interested in, not virtuosity. Because I know what you're saying. There is rhythm, there's melody, but I think fundamentally it's like a sort of like pain, like a car that can't start, that it is, or a car that keeps like stalling, or a computer that keeps glitching or something, or a machine that's kind of jammed. For me, it's rhythmic, but it's always at the same time dissonant. There's a beauty there, but it's always clumsy. And that's what differentiates Beckett from those other writers who do like more like mellifluous, streamlined versions of that. Like my voice kind of fails to cap. Yeah, you feel like the voice cracking at certain moments, But I don't know if you agree with this.
No, I mean, like, I'm both hungry and tired.
Okay.
It's a bit of a, it's like
They're getting a bit grumpy here, huh?
No, it's not that. It's like, I'm like a little Hamas operative, and Patrick's up there with his quadcopter, and he's just like dropped a grenade, No, but I can't repeat the same thing, as many times. Where what it does is it presents a certain kind of illegibility in this beautiful package that then becomes legible in a kind of like bourgeois reception of, oh, that's great literature.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that I could imagine like some like Saudi sheikh having performed on his yacht, and it's precisely because people can't, because there's people don't have the I don't know, like the ledger or the register to really understand it and really talk about it. Like, we all could spend hours talking about it, but it's precisely because it's illegible that it becomes the kind of white noise that then lends them this kind of ability to devour it, like as a form of social prestige. It's like it's like I don't know, like for me, it's like I said, it's the kind of sophistication that a Saudi Arabian sheikh would have. They bring out this pantomime poet who'd perform this thing from Beckett.
Yeah, there is something interesting there, like, but again, like, we're not going to go into it, but about how easily, for example, Dadaism and surrealism were captured by advertising and capitalism. There's something similar kind of movement in the way that you're imagining that speech from Beckett being captured by you know, some sort of like hyper rich, you know, guy on his yacht, you know, sheikh, whatever it is, like whoever it happens to be, and then just being, because it's devoid of content and therefore it doesn't threaten in some way, you know. I don't know. I see it a bit like I don't see it as having that musical. I see it a bit as being like atonal.
I just hear techno when I hear it for some reason. I'm like, you know, I mean,
I feel like
imagine
it's the wrong note every time, and it's only because it's the wrong note every time that it works. Maybe I read it in a bad way, but so it's a bit like someone who needs to vomit, but the vomit keeps getting caught in their throat. That's how I think of it.
He does exactly the same thing with exactly the same kind of like melodies and maneuvers in that video that he made for the BBC with the mouth.
Okay.
Yeah,
no, but he does do it.
It's like it's almost like a de-aestheticized form of exactly the same thing, you know, like the movements and the repetitions and their kind of positioning, and this return to the unknowing, but then this kind of like resurrection of the knowing, you know. So like the death of Bishop Berkeley, of course, being a philosopher, for example, you know, like these kinds of things. It's like he does this a lot in his work, and I can't see it as anything other than I mean the very context in which it was presented and which it was emerged, you know, which was a very kind of like a very elitist and, you know, like bourgeois kind of like you know, it isn't like I said, it isn't, you know, obscurantist, and maybe that's its genius. It is precisely like legible, but you know what I don't like about it is that it kind of disavows itself, and it disavows itself in such a way to provide like you know, for the last time to repeat it, to provide like an illegible legibility, so that people who actually don't have the register and don't understand and just want to, you know, consume it almost as if one does a strawberry, you know, they just want to point it and say, oh, that was great literature. Oh, and then did you hear what you know, Tracy did to you know, Sean the other day? Oh, but have you heard what's going on in the oil markets? You know, it's almost like that scene in The Graduate where, you know, he's like having this moment of existential crisis, and the guy's like, you know, plastics. You know, I can kind of imagine like this kind of like, you know, virtuosic linguistic performance just being completely submerged into like an utterly non-consequential context. Going nowhere and doing nothing.
I like what you're saying. Yeah, I'm just going to let it stand now. I think there is lots more to say, but because I do think you're right. Beckett kind of fetishizes this maneuver and gets lost in it. You know, it just kind of almost like loves these echoes and rhythms and stuff. And he does it in like Happy Days, and he does it in his novels as well. You know, and sometimes I feel like deeply disappointed by it. You know,
I mean, is that from Waiting for Godot?
But that is you got to remember that's in the middle of Waiting for Godot, and it's just like it's meant to be. Yeah. It's meant to be vomited up.
It's just you know, but yeah, but I feel the exact same way about like Antonin Artaud's Theatre of Cruelty. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, let me have the last word now, you bourgeois dickheads. And let me just say, maybe I am, you know, petit bourgeois in this way, or petty. But I mean, there's also something about jazz, you know. Fundamentally, the same argument can be made there, right, in a certain way, or about many things, like the formalist experiments that are, you know, like formalist in such a way that they can just be captured by whatever, by advertisement, by business, by capitalism, or whatever. That they are so easy to kind of mimic, and, you know, the form is catchy. They're catchy as such, and I just think sometimes it is a matter of like, okay, but is this piece of writing interesting? Was the reception uninteresting? I don't know. You know, sometimes for me, it is worthy to distinguish the two, even though they go hand in hand a lot of times.
Yeah.
Well, that is my mic drop.
All right. Well, yeah, maybe we can get some Beckett in the club next week. We can see, because I'm pretty sure that that thing's out of copyright, so we could just watch it.
Yeah, it is. I'm pretty sure it is.
What is?
The what's it called? The mouth widget. What?
I think it's called Not I. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
that thing. Yeah, the one you sent me. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks
All
for
right.
listening to this great conversation with
Safeguards.
greats in thought.
I will speak soon, though. Yeah.
All right. See you later, dudes. Yeah.
All right.
Safe, man.
Ciao.